Hello and welcome to the Glamptuary Podcast, where we talk about the experiential outdoor hospitality industry, and I am your host, Bobby Marsden. We're continuing our conversation in Season 4 about the business side of outdoor hospitality, and we are sitting down with Chief Revenue Officer of Campground Views, Garett McKinnon. Campground Views represents over 25,000 outdoor hospitality resorts across the United States and Canada, and that gives Garett a very unique vantage point as to what's happening out there in outdoor hospitality. In this episode, we talk specifically about some of the challenges that are being faced between the United States and Canada with regards to travel and tourism based on the tariffs that are currently in place. Garett also talks about trends that he sees happening with RV parks, campgrounds, and outdoor hospitality resorts in general to up their game for their consumers. And of course, Garett offers some amazing tips for any would-be entrepreneurs out there who are thinking about getting in the outdoor hospitality, or any seasoned veterans who are thinking about improving their offering for their consumer. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 2 of season 4 of the Glamptuary Podcast. Garett McKinnon, wonderful to have you on the Glamptuary Podcast.
Bobby, thank you very much for the invite. I'm excited to be here and happy to speak with you.
You have a company called Campground Views, and so you're really helping, I think, a lot of RV parks and campgrounds market themselves. You're bringing them forward kind of into the modern era with what you do, but I think it's best to hear it from the source. So if you could, why don't you give us a brief description of what Campground Views offers, and also a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in outdoor hospitality.
Awesome. Yeah, I can definitely do that, Bobby. So Campground Views is a 360-degree video virtual tour technology that is connecting the RVers to the campground in a way that we haven't seen before. And what I mean by that is, most folks are comfortable using a technology similar to Google Maps, where, it's stitched photos that are put together and you got to click your way down the street to be able to look around. What my partner has developed is he's developed a full video option for an RVer to basically sit in the comfort of their home miles away and drive through the entire campground and immerse themselves in the park before they decide to book the park and before they pack up the family and sometimes their house and drive miles across the state to show up to a campground and find out that maybe this site wasn't the best choice for me. So we've really brought the experience of the campground to the camper in the comfort of their own home prior to them packing up and making that dedication to drive into a campground. So we've had amazing experience speaking with campers across the US that are using our technology. Wonderful feedback from park owners that are using our technology to really showcase their campground. And we just continue to grow. And we currently have over 3,500 parks that are utilizing our tour across the US right now. And there's no slowing down for the amount of parks that are going to continue to register and implement our service, which has been a lot of fun. Myself personally, I didn't know I was going to be in the outdoor space or the campground industry. I live up here in Canada. Our camping season is very short, and now I find myself heavily involved in the U.S. camping market. I had a background in building other businesses up here in Canada, more in the heating and cooling space, so HVAC as we refer to it. Of course, there's a massive need where I am for heating and cooling equipment on a daily basis. We're either heating our house or we're cooling it off. Nobody seems to find that comfortable ground. And I had a very successful career building 2 HVAC companies. And then I found myself kind of doing some consulting. And that was when Mark Kep, the owner of Campground Views, reached out to me. And he basically came and very clearly said, "Hey, Garett, I got this awesome product. I'm great behind the scenes. I'm great with the IT. I'm great with figuring out everything that we need to do. However, I need some help getting it to market and growing it in the industry." And that's where I came in. And in the past year, I've had an absolute blast building the organization to where it is today and really helping Mark execute on his vision, which was, how do we connect the camper to the campground using something better than some old thumbnail photos that don't really represent the park anymore?
So you are kind of coming in fresh, and I think that's probably what led you to say, this would be a nice way. If I was considering going here, what would I want to see? What are some of the other things that you've noticed when you've been immersing yourself into outdoor hospitality, whether it's a campground, RV, or really anything? Is there anything that kind of struck you as surprising, or anything that you thought, that didn't see that coming, but maybe we can do it differently.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of caught my attention right away was the size of the market. So how big the actual industry is, from the manufacturers, the suppliers, the campground owners, the campgrounds themselves, the amount of RVers and campers that are out there. I didn't realize that the market in the industry was as big as it truly is. Then on top of that, I just saw there was a massive opportunity and kind of a turnover or a change in the guard, I'd like to say, in the industry itself, where we've got a bit of a shift from, the baby boomer era, let's call it, that's maybe been running the campground for the last 30 or 40 years, maybe ready to retire. They're tired. The seasons are long. They don't get a lot of time off when they're in camp. It's, 7 days a week. It's a lot of hours. So I saw this opportunity where we've got this massive market that's going through a pretty big demographic change right now, and not just from the personnel side, but from the technology side. And when I met with Mark and saw what he had going on at Campground Views, I saw that there was a huge need for a technology like he had developed in the industry, and there was an opportunity for us to capitalize as the market starts to change.
So I know your focus is mainly campgrounds, RV parks, but I think that I've seen, or at least I've noticed, that there is even a transition among RV parks and campgrounds that are starting to lean into glamping. So it might be kind of a collection of a smorgasbord of all the above. Is that something you've noticed, that RV park owners, in addition to bringing technology forward, they might be also trying to bring some additional structures forward?
I would say not only have I noticed it, I'm actually an advocate for it. So as the demographic of camper and RVer continues to evolve and change, I think that it's imperative now. And when I'm speaking to campground owners today and they're planning expansions or they're planning upgrades to the park, I'm a huge advocate for them moving into kind of the glamping space, we'll call it. And, instead of just putting in a pad, maybe putting in a dome, or maybe putting in a prospector tent or a small cabin. I think that's a huge market right now. And, glamping is a bit of a buzzword sometimes for some people. They think, I want to go glamping. Okay, well, it's all about the outdoor experience. Now, the reality is that with the change in the market and the demographic of the younger kids that are coming up in the industry today, they don't always have the resources available right now to be able to afford to go out in a traditional RV weekend. And so when I say that, I say, taking the experience of buying a tow vehicle and buying a towable unit and or buying a drivable RV unit, as opposed to, hey, I can literally pack a backpack, pack a cooler, show up to the campground, pretty much turnkey, walk in, set up, enjoy the experience of what the campground has to offer, and not have the overhead and the storage and the insurance and some of the other things that come with, traditional RV life. So when I speak to park owners now, I'm always recommending that they're paying attention to the shift in the demographic and what people are looking for. And it is financially difficult today for the RVer, the camper, to spend some of that money. Whereas I think about glamping and how easy it is, and I've done it myself, and it's a great time. So why not implement that into the campground experience and to be able to serve both demographics? I think if you're not thinking about expanding into that space on your campground, your RV site, you're really limiting your market. And that's the last thing that you want to do, is kind of cut off some of the demographic that's out there that you can drive revenue from. So I think you really have to step back and look and say, okay, as I expand this park, or as I change and upgrade my park, where do I want to put dollars into things that are going to be positive revenue generators for campgrounds moving forward?
That's a really interesting point. And I think it also is kind of region specific, because certain weather climates, you coming from Canada, obviously you deal with a lot of things that somebody in Texas might not deal with, although there are snowstorms down there too now. But in addition to climate, what are some of the other maybe differences that you've seen as far as Canada travel and RV parks and glamping versus what you've noticed in the United States?
Yeah, I think one of the big differences is the amenities. The parks in the US right now are leaning heavy into the amenities, which is really exciting for the the families that are attending the campgrounds now. I think in the Canadian market, we lack in a lot of amenities. I live here in Ontario, and Ontario provincial parks really just offer you showers and the forest, and here's a pad to put down your tent or your pop trailer, whatever the case may be. I get into some of these campgrounds in the US and the different things that they have available, from, the bouncy castles, the water parks, the arcades, and they just have so many amenities that are truly drawing people in. And that's, again, kind of going back to, why would you not put, let's call it, the traditional glamping facilities now onto your park when people want to come and they want to experience your water park? They want to have a place for the kids to go on the weekend and, use the arcade, use the different things that you've built to really make it more of a resort feel, as opposed to just a campground. Before I got into the industry, when I thought about a campground coming from Canada, it was literally, all right, here's a patch in the forest, put up your tent, cook over the fire, and, if the weather hits, well, good luck. Yeah. Then I got down into the US market and I was like, oh, these aren't really campgrounds. These are resorts. We're offering a lot more amenities and luxuries to our guests that is going to make sure that whether it's weather, whether it's time of year, they're going to be able to have a great experience when they come to our facility. And I think that was kind of another eye opener for me. It was realizing the scale and, the different features that are truly offered at the parks in the South. And keeping in mind, if you are going to put in any type of, glamping structure, you're probably going to have the ability to run that park, if it's a seasonal park, a little bit later into the year, or maybe open up a little bit earlier. I spoke with some of my park owners who said they keep some of their cabins now open year round, and they're attracting a whole different demographic of camper now because they're able to keep their park open year round, which is generating extra revenue for them at the end of the day that they didn't have 5 years ago.
Yeah. And, it's the same thing for me. When I think of camping, I think of very rustic. I'm doing a lot of the work. I think one of the things that glamping offers is you get that connection to nature, but you didn't have to do all the work to set the structure up. And then RVing, I think, is a whole different lifestyle altogether, because now you're mobile and you can go from park to park to park pretty quickly if you want to. When we talk about terms in this industry, I think it's still kind of the Wild West as far as how people perceive things. You could put 3 different, I think, offers up. They could have the same exact structures, the same exact amenities, be in different locations, but one person calls it a boutique hotel, one person calls it an outdoor hospitality destination, one person calls it a campground. Right. Do you think there's any kind of separation, or are there any kind of boxes being checked now that are helping to define the industry, so a consumer could be like, when you say this word, I know what to expect?
Yeah, I think you've even missed some there. I think you have, RV resort, RV park. So there's a lot. You're actually right there. There's a lot of different terms that we're classifying, these parks as. I would say what's starting to happen is that they're starting to blend together. I think that's kind of what's taking shape here, is that we're looking at the industry as a whole and we're kind of finger picking, okay, what are the best things that we can take from, that organization or that group that's building parks? And hey, we're going to take those ideas and we're going to implement them into our campground, our resort, whatever the case may be, whatever you want to call it. But I think that's kind of what we see happening right now, is there's some crossover that's making that blend. I know a lot of campground owners, traditional campground owners, we'll call them, that are attending the glamping show, and they're seeing things going, this would be fantastic in my campground, and hey, I've got 14 extra acres, I'm going to start building this out. And vice versa. I think the glamping industry is looking at the campground industry and thinking, okay, what amenities can we add here now? Like, it's great that somebody wants to come and, sleep in this really cool dome that's got a clear roof and they can see the stars while they're sleeping. Okay, well, when they wake up, what are they going to do? How can we entertain them? Right. So I think now that the blend is going to start to take shape even more, and we're going to see that crossover, and there's going to be a level of expectation of like, here's the bare minimum that we want when we get to your facility or your campground, your site. And then we're going to work our way up from there. So I think that's going to be an exciting crossover in the next few years as the industry really, again, starts to grow, starts to evolve, and really do what the camper's asking for and what they're looking for moving forward, because the camper today has a whole different expectation from 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that point, I think some of the larger hotel chains like Marriott, Hyatt, Hilton, Best Western, they're also finally recognizing, or maybe they're finally listening, or maybe they started listening a couple of years ago and it just takes them a long time to make a decision, but they're definitely getting involved in outdoor hospitality. And I think it's because their consumers are asking for a change. to that point, what kinds of things do you think some campground owners or RVers should be thinking about in the industry as big hotel now starts to look at it? Because they bring a set of best practices.
So when I think about kind of the big institutional organizations, I think about big institutional dollars. And I know a lot of park owners that run very lean on an annual basis, from the time that they open, maybe in early May, to when they close at the end of September, early October. They don't have big budgets. So one of the things, and not to put any fear into anybody, but one of the things that does concern me is this big industry money is going to be able to come in and do renovations and do upgrades to campgrounds that, maybe a family owned operation might not have access and resources to. Mm-hmm. That being said, I also think it's exciting because they're going to bring some fresh eyes to the industry. They're going to bring some fresh opportunity to the industry and really show the industry maybe some of the places that we've been lacking for the last 20 to 30 years. So I think there will be a little bit of, again, changing of the guard here as some of the, the older campground operators start to move out and the big industry starts to move in. As you said, it's already happening. We see it now. And this is no different than the hotel industry, motel industry many, many years ago when we did have mom and pop operators. And now it's, again, chain, Hilton, Marriott. They've come in and they've adapted to, hey, we're going to take over these locations because we see them as financial opportunities on the upside. Huge land play as well. I mean, something that you got to realize is that these campground owners, they own a lot of acres across the U.S. I've gone to some of these events and I've stood in some rooms and I thought to myself, geez, there's a lot of people in this space that own a lot of acreage in this state right now, right? There's not many 1 acre campgrounds out there. Mm-mm. A lot of these folks own a lot of acres. So I think the big industry money is going to change the campground, attitude and how things are getting done because they're going to be able to pull levers a lot quicker than some of the smaller organizations.
Yeah, and if I think about, some of the things that I do enjoy when I go to a hotel, it's that they have a staff that's responsive, whereas a campground may not, for reasons maybe that are financial, or maybe they're wanting a keyless, personless experience where you just go there, you check in, and you don't really see any staff. That said, I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that when families go, kids want things to do. And there needs to be some experiences that are tied to it that hopefully provides enough entertainment for their stay. There's also another way to look at it where there's outside providers. If you go to a nature-centered location, there might be hikes that aren't involved necessarily on property, but there's guides that could take you. Have you noticed any programs that are being put in place with some of the RV parks or campgrounds or more rural outdoor hospitality destinations that are kind of like a concierge service for experiences to do something beyond the property?
Yeah, we're starting to see that now. And one of the points that you mentioned, which is actually becoming a big issue, is staffing. I know a lot of campground owners right now are struggling with finding the right staff. Also, I would say behind that is the education of the staff as well. So, it's a very on-the-job, hands-on type training experience. There's not, to my knowledge anyways, there's not a lot of university courses. I know we have some, outdoor education type classes, but I haven't heard of too many folks that are just dedicated to going out and, hey, I want to run a campground and I'm going to go take Campground 101 at University of Harvard. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong if that course exists. And if you've taken it, I apologize. Congratulations to you. But, there's a lot of need for the right people in the industry to help it grow, to help it mature. There's a lot of need to coach and train these people in the industry to, again, people are what's going to drive it. Now, I have seen where a lot more campgrounds are starting to look outside their gate to see what is around them. And I've been encouraging campgrounds to do this. Open up the doors, drive out the park, and go see what's around you that the guests can experience now. And, wineries, brewery tours. I know of a park in Colorado, they're offering off-road tours and Jeeps because, they've got that market in their area. So you also have some campgrounds where maybe the family's just going to stay there. It's a place to rest at, because it's in a tourist destination, whether it's in the mountains, and they just want to put their head down and sleep and get up the next day and go on a big hike. But for the other campgrounds, what's around you? Mm-hmm. look around, whether that's a partnership with a local church, whether it's a partnership with a restaurant, whether it's a partnership with a winery. What is around you that you can give to your guests that don't actually cost you any money other than a conversation, going out and having a conversation, introducing yourself and saying, hey, my name's Garett. I own the campground down the road. We'd like to be able to bring some of our guests to your or some of your guests to, your facility, because in turn, that's going to be an amenity that you can advertise, you can promote, and it costs you nothing.
That's a wonderful piece of advice. Also, it supports community, which means sustainable travel. And, people get that term confused. They think it's all about nature and water and cleanliness, but sustainability really is about also sustaining the community that you exist in and being reciprocal. And I think that's a great way to do that. So I think a lot of what you're hitting on is education, and not only so much for consumers to know what's going on, but also for the potential campground owners that don't exist yet, or the current ones that are looking to kind of revamp what they're doing. Where are the sources now? You mentioned the Glamping show, and I've been there, and I think that's a wonderful resource. Are there other conferences, shows, platforms, things that people that are thinking about getting into this industry should be attending so they get their feet wet before they dive into the pool?
Definitely. So there's actually a state association pretty much for every state for the campground owners to be a part of and register. It is a really important thing for the campground owners to be a part of these associations, because these associations do a lot of learning events. They do a lot of trade shows. And at these trade shows, not only are you going to get to network, you're going to get to meet other campground owners. You're going to get to meet, different legislation providers that are in the space that are able to go to bat for you for, all the red tape issues that you have when you want to put in an extra 100 campgrounds or 100 campsites at your campground. So I would say that's probably the first place that a campground owner needs to turn, is they need to look up what is their local association, and they need to be registered, and they need to be on board with that association. We are huge advocates in these associations. We do a lot of sponsoring. We speak at a lot of these association events as well. So it is kind of like the first point you should get connected with, and then build out from there. Obviously, you have traditional RV shows, Tampa RV show, Hershey RV show. There's a lot of RV shows that take place throughout the year, which are also good. Great for the industry, for you to get out. There's different vendors that are set up there. But I would say first and foremost, be a part of your state association. And there's a couple of organizations that do kind of, they invite states from all over. OHI, the outdoor hospitality industry, COE, down in Branson, Missouri. I can't say enough good things about the organizations because I've seen the work that they do on the ground for the campgrounds.
I think that's an awesome tip, because there's so much that goes into permitting, zoning, regulatory. And I think a lot of that is a little archaic in certain situations where it's pulling off of 1960s ordinances when, now we're in 2025, people are doing glamping, and those ordinances, that word didn't even exist back then. So I think it's always crucial to be helping them too, because I think they're trying to figure out how to rewrite their ordinances to be more compatible with what people are trying to do today. Between Canada and the US, obviously there's a lot of travel that happens back and forth in the northern states. I know I'm from Minnesota, and I used to bounce up to Canada all the time for hockey tournaments and got our butt kicked. But
Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, it happens. What have you noticed as far as like kind of the travel between Canada to US, US to Canada? Do you see a lot of that happening, or do you wish it would happen more, or is there something preventing it?
All right, so we're going to go there, eh, Bobby? It's the right time to have this conversation. There is a lot of noise happening in the industry about Canadian travel to the US, US travel to Canada. I think, it's easy to point fingers at the leaders of Canada and the leaders of the US right now and point blame. There's a lot of factors that aren't being discussed, and there's a lot of factors that aren't being talked about. I mean, at the end of the day, okay, if a Canadian doesn't agree with a tariff that's put on our country when we build a car or somewhere else or whatever the case is, that's all fine. But, the Canadian dollar right now is not in a very good place. It's probably in one of the worst places it's been in a very long time. I know insurance premiums for senior citizens are getting out of control. And, when you're a senior citizen, you're on a fixed income. Mm-hmm. So, you might get a 1% to 2% bump annually. That doesn't offset the insurance premiums that I'm seeing senior citizens pay. Additionally, our fuel prices are high. Our food prices are high. Our cost of living has been going up exponentially over the last few years. And that's causing a lot of factors when it comes to at least Canadian travel into the US. Because if you're on a fixed income and all these operating costs that you're used to paying on a day-to-day basis are now increased 15, 20%, well, that's your spending money. That's your fun money. That's your vacation money. So, am I going to pay my bills now and my property tax and afford gas and groceries, or am I going to go to Florida for a month? So I want to make sure that people aren't just saying, oh, I'm not traveling because of this or because of that. There's a lot of factors right now that are affecting the travel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the costs are something that definitely can be preventative. Also, I think on the flip side, it costs a lot more to run these big hotel establishments and these big all-inclusive resorts that might be in Florida or Mexico or something. And I think it's actually somewhat pushing people to take a little bit more affordable approach. Sometimes that means that's great for the RV parks. That's great for the campgrounds. That's maybe getting people to try something because they want to take that vacation. They have the money set aside to do something. They just want to make sure they're getting the most bang for the buck. And I think when they're able to find locations where they can plan better, because it's all about a risk, right? If you've never been somewhere, you can see something online, you can read reviews, you can do the best you can, but you're going to find out what it's like once you get there.
Definitely.
And so that's one thing I think that Campground Reviews does a nice job with the tours, because I remember when I used to camp, I would find YouTube videos of someone walking around with their cell phone and you kind of saw the campsite. So yeah, I think planning and really purchasing with a purpose, because you don't get many chances now to take vacation sometimes. It's really important to make sure you can find out as much as you can.
Definitely. And, that's one thing that I talk about within our industries. I talk about that pre-booking anxiety and that pre-arrival anxiety. I think anyone that's planned a trip, we've sat down, we've opened up the computer, we've gone to the traditional, TripAdvisor, we've looked for the reviews, and sometimes you can read those reviews and they can throw you on a wild path. Sometimes I look at a restaurant and I go, geez, there's really good reviews, but then this one person, right, which you kind of have to take with a grain of salt, but you've got that pre-booking anxiety. Like, I hope I selected the right site. I hope I selected the right campground. And then you fast forward and maybe you booked 4 months ago and now you're leaving to go on that trip and you're loading your family into the vehicle and all the expense that entails. And, I know myself driving to a location, I have that pre-arrival anxiety where I'm going, I really hope this works out. I really hope this is a good time. I really hope this resort is what I thought it was going to be. And, I had that experience not long ago, just booked a hotel and the photos looked fantastic. And I got there and the photos weren't, what really took place in the hotel. So, there is that anxiety from the guest. And what we try to do, at least with our service, is to mitigate that and minimize it. And one of the things that we see is, typically negative reviews are going down and positive reviews are going up, because what we see online using our service is a clear representation of what the guest is going to get. There's no bait and switch here. There's no AI changing the look of the water to make it crystal blue when it's maybe not that blue. So, we want to make sure that it's, hey, what you see and what you're reserving is what you're going to get when you show up, and there's not going to be any surprises for you and your family.
Well, that's awesome. I applaud everything you're doing, Garett, and I thank you for taking the time to hop on the pod. And hopefully I'll see you down the trail sometime, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in the U.S. Who knows? Either way, we'll have a good time.
Sounds good. I will try to keep it away from the hockey game, so that way, you can have a little bit more success.
There you go. Olympics is coming up, so we'll see what happens.
Can't wait, Bobby. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
All right, Garett. Bye-bye. I'd like to thank Garett McKinnon for joining us on the Glamptuary Podcast. He provided a wealth of information, which we're extremely grateful for. If you'd like to follow along and see what Campground Views is up to, or see what Garett McKinnon is up to, you can do so by visiting the website, which is www.campgroundviews.com. That is www.campgroundviews.com. And if you'd like to follow us on the Glamptuary Podcast, you can do so by visiting our website, which is www.glamptuary.com. That is www.glamptuary.com. You can also follow us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Pandora Podcasts, YouTube. Wherever you like to follow us, we just ask that you follow, and we thank you for doing so. We'll see you down the trail on the next episode. Until then, be well.